right, but they're not going to do that. And with Noelle Quinn, as you mentioned, no challenge.
Clark.
Welcome back to Clark USA fans. Most people think Caitlin Clark's story is all about logo threes, deep pull-ups, and those impossible highlight shots that somehow always find the net. And yes, that's part of it. That's the version the world sees, the viral clips, the crowd reactions, the numbers that break records. But that's not the full story. Not even close. Because behind all the noise, behind the cameras, the debates, the pressure, and the expectations of an entire league evolving in real time, there's a deeper, quieter conversation happening, one that doesn't show up on stat sheets or social media timelines. It's a conversation between two players from completely different eras, yet connected by something far more intense than nostalgia. On one side, you have Larry Bird, a name that carries weight not just because of championships or accolades, but because of what he represented when the game itself needed saving. And on the other side, you have Caitlin Clark, a modern phenomenon who has stepped into a moment that feels strikingly similar, whether people want to admit it or not. And when Bird spoke to Clark, it wasn't about shooting form. It wasn't about extending her range or refining her mechanics. It wasn't even about fame, endorsements, or the spotlight that follows her everywhere. What he gave her wasn't motivation. It was something far more serious, a warning. Because Bird understands something that very few people ever truly experience. He understands that greatness isn't just about getting to the top. That's the easy part compared to what comes next. The real challenge begins the moment everyone expects you to stay there. The moment you stop being just a player and become a symbol. A responsibility. A target. To really understand why Bird's words matter so much, you have to look deeper than highlights. You have to look at where both of them came from. Bird grew up in a small town in Indiana, a place where attention didn't exist, where hard work wasn't optional, and where the game was built in silence long before the world started watching. Clark's roots in the Midwest carry that same DNA. Different state, same mentality. Places where discipline is normal, not celebrated. Where showing up matters more than showing off. And that similarity isn't just a coincidence, it's a pattern. When Bird entered the NBA in 1979, the league wasn't what it is today. It was struggling. Viewership was low, public interest was fading, and the league was being overshadowed by other sports. It needed something or someone to change everything. And that's exactly what happened when Bird and Magic Johnson arrived. Their rivalry didn't just entertain, it rebuilt the foundation of the league. Every packed arena, every massive TV deal, every global fan base today traces back to that moment. Now fast forward to the present, and the parallels become impossible to ignore. The WNBA, despite its talent and growth, was still searching for that breakthrough, that one player who could shift everything overnight. And then came Caitlin Clark. Her impact wasn't subtle. It wasn't gradual. It was immediate and undeniable. Ratings surged. Arenas filled. Conversations expanded beyond the usual audience. And maybe the clearest sign of her influence came when she wasn't even playing, when her absence caused a massive drop in viewership. That kind of effect doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen often. It happens when one player becomes bigger than the moment. And Bird recognized that instantly. Because he had lived it. He knew what it meant to carry a league's expectations on your shoulders while still trying to perform at the highest level. He knew what it felt like to be the reason fans showed up, and at the same time, the reason opponents played harder, hit harder, and pushed further just to prove a point. That's the reality for players like Clark. Not just competing, but carrying something much bigger than the game itself.
Here comes Sabally. Clark.
And that's why Bird didn't talk about offense or strategy. He talked about pressure. About the invisible weight that builds when every game becomes more than just a game. When every mistake is magnified. When every reaction is analyzed. When every opponent sees you not just as another player, but as an opportunity. Because the real danger isn't physical. It's mental. Early in her career, Clark faced that reality head-on. Veterans tested her. Defenses targeted her. Physical play increased. And naturally, she reacted. Frustration showed. Emotions came through. There were moments where she tried to force things not because she didn't know better, but because the pressure demanded a response. And that's where Bird's message became critical. He introduced her to what he called the silence of the greats. Not literal silence, but control, discipline, the ability to stay locked in no matter what's happening around you. No reactions, no wasted energy, no letting outside noise dictate decisions inside the game. Because reacting is natural. But controlling that reaction? That's what separates good players from generational ones. Bird had been through it all before. The expectations, the physical play, the pressure of being both needed and targeted at the same time. And he understood something that only experience can teach, that the biggest threat to players like Clark isn't the competition. It's the weight of everything surrounding it. The expectations, the spotlight, the constant demand to prove something every single night. And if that weight isn't handled the right way, it doesn't just affect performance, it breaks players down over time. But if it is handled correctly, it becomes an advantage. That's the transformation Bird was pointing her toward. Turning pressure into focus. Turning expectations into fuel. Turning everything that's meant to distract into something that sharpens her game instead. Because at this level, talent isn't enough. Skill isn't enough. Even hard work isn't enough. What matters is control. And that's the difference between players who shine for a moment and players who define an era. Caitlin Clark isn't just playing games right now. She's navigating a situation that only a handful of athletes in history have ever experienced. A moment where everything the league, the fans, the media is shifting around her in real time. And thanks to voices like Larry Bird, she's not walking into it blindly. She's being prepared for it. Because the real story isn't just about how far she can shoot. It's about how long she can carry everything that comes with it.
The ball in transition. Oh, that's not gonna waste.
There are certain players in basketball history whose presence doesn't just fill a room, it changes it. Not because they try to, not because they demand attention, but because everything around them naturally shifts the moment they step in. That was the reality for Larry Bird, and now, whether she asked for it or not, it's becoming the reality for Caitlin Clark. And with that kind of presence comes something most people watching from the outside will never fully understand, a psychological battlefield that has nothing to do with shooting percentages or highlight plays. Bird understood that better than almost anyone. So when he spoke to Clark, he didn't give her motivational quotes or surface-level advice. He gave her something sharper, something more precise, something built from experience at the highest level. His message was simple, but it carried weight. Don't beat them with your mouth, beat them with their own expectations. What he meant by that wasn't just about staying quiet. It was about control. Because the moment a player like Clark shows visible frustration, arguing with referees, reacting to hard fouls, letting emotions spill out, she's no longer dictating the game. She's responding to it. And that's exactly what her opponents want. They're not just trying to outscore her. They're trying to pull her out of the mental space where she's most dangerous, that calm, calculated zone where her basketball IQ operates at a completely different level. Every reaction becomes a small victory for the defense. Every argument becomes a distraction. Every emotional moment shifts focus away from execution. And at the professional level, especially for a player carrying as much attention as Clark, those small shifts add up fast. Bird had lived through this exact scenario decades earlier, during the height of the legendary rivalry between the Boston Celtics and the Los Angeles Lakers. On one side, you had Magic Johnson, charismatic, expressive, full of energy. On the other side, you had Bird, quiet, cold, calculated. He didn't need to talk. He didn't need to react. His presence alone applied pressure. His silence spoke louder than any trash talk ever could. And that's what he saw in Clark, that same internal edge. What he described as the assassin's gene. Not aggression in the emotional sense, but precision. Focus. The ability to dismantle opponents without giving them anything in return. But he also saw that she was wasting that edge, spending energy on referees, on narratives, on players who were trying to drag her into a different kind of game. Because in professional sports, respect doesn't come from arguing your case. It doesn't come from proving yourself loudly. It comes from performance. From results that are so undeniable that no one can question them, even if they never say it out loud. Bird made it clear, you don't need validation. You don't need approval. You let the scoreboard handle that. You let your game create a silence where doubt used to exist. And that message landed exactly where it needed to. Because what happened after that conversation wasn't just a slight adjustment in attitude. It was a transformation in how Clark approached the game entirely. To really see it, you have to go beyond stats. You have to watch the game itself. Before that moment, Clark was playing under a different kind of pressure, not just to win, but to perform in a way that matched the expectations built around her. Fans came to see logo threes, deep shots, highlight moments. And at times, she leaned into that. Taking difficult shots early in possessions, forcing plays that created excitement but also inconsistency. It wasn't a lack of ability. It was the weight of expectation influencing decision-making.
2, whips it to Boston. Right back to Clark.
She was playing for moments instead of outcomes. But after that shift, everything changed, not dramatically on the surface, but fundamentally underneath. The biggest difference? Time. Specifically, how she used it. Clark began making decisions just a fraction earlier, sometimes by as little as 2 seconds. That might sound insignificant, but in basketball, it changes everything. 2 seconds is the difference between a defense setting itself and a defense scrambling. Between a double team arriving on time and arriving too late. Instead of holding the ball and reacting to pressure, she started anticipating it. Reading defenses before they could fully commit. Delivering passes the moment a defensive shift began, not after it happened. That one adjustment completely disrupted the strategies teams had been using against her. Double teams that once forced difficult shots suddenly became liabilities. Because the moment defenders committed, Clark had already moved the ball. Already found the open player. Already turned their aggression into an advantage. This is where the comparison to Bird becomes real, not stylistically, but mentally. Bird didn't just play the game. He controlled it. He manipulated spacing, timing, and movement in ways that forced defenses to react to him, even when he didn't have the ball. Clark began to do the same. She stopped trying to fight the defense directly and started using its own structure against it. And the impact wasn't limited to her individual performance. It changed everything around her. Players like Aaliyah Boston suddenly found more space in the paint. Passing angles opened up. Timing improved. Efficiency increased, not because Boston changed her game, but because Clark elevated the environment around her. Kelsey Mitchell started getting cleaner perimeter looks. Sophie Cunningham became more dangerous from 3 because defenses couldn't afford to leave her. Lexi Hull benefited from off-ball movement that was no longer being tracked as closely because attention stayed locked on Clark. The offense evolved from something predictable, a system centered on one player creating everything, into something layered, dynamic, and far more difficult to defend. And at the center of it all was control. That's the part Bird understood from the beginning. The part he was trying to pass on. Because at the highest level, the difference between good and great isn't just talent. It's how you manage everything that comes with that talent. The pressure, the expectations, the attention, the physical play, the psychological battles happening on every possession. Clark didn't lose her edge. She refined it, redirected it, focused it where it mattered most. She stopped reacting to the game and started controlling it. And once that shift happens, everything else follows.
Caitlin Clark's second deep shot.
What Larry Bird shared with Caitlin Clark behind closed doors was powerful, but what he said publicly changed everything. Because this wasn't just mentorship anymore. This was a statement that forced the entire basketball world, especially the WNBA, to confront a reality it had been quietly avoiding. In a headline-grabbing 2025 interview, Bird didn't describe Clark as just another rising star or even a future face of the league. He said something much bigger, something that hit like a shockwave. Caitlin Clark isn't just a player, she's a franchise. And that comparison wasn't casual. Bird pointed directly back to 1979, to the moment when he entered the NBA alongside Magic Johnson, when the league itself was struggling to survive. Back then, The NBA needed more than talent. It needed transformation. And Bird made it clear what he and Magic did for the NBA is structurally similar to what Clark is doing right now for the WNBA. Not gradually. Not theoretically. In real time. But Bird didn't stop there. He addressed something far more uncomfortable, how Clark had been treated since entering the league. The physical play, the targeting, the resistance from veterans. And instead of softening his words, he made the comparison personal. He said when he came into the league, veterans didn't welcome him either. They didn't like the attention. They didn't like a rookie stepping into the spotlight. But eventually, the smart ones understood something important. He wasn't taking anything away from them. He was increasing the value of everything around them. That statement hit hard because it wasn't just support, it was criticism. It was a direct challenge to anyone who had framed Clark's struggles as normal or necessary. It called out the idea that excessive physicality was just part of earning respect. It questioned why the league's most valuable asset was being treated like a problem instead of an opportunity. Bird described Clark as a rising tide, and the meaning behind that was impossible to ignore. When the tide rises, it lifts everything with it. Every player benefits. Every contract grows. Every arena fills. Every deal becomes bigger. Whether people choose to acknowledge it or not, her presence is expanding the entire ecosystem of the league. And that's where the real shift happened, not just in public perception, but in Clark's mindset. Because in their private conversations, Bird reframed her role completely. He didn't tell her she was just playing for the Indiana Fever. He told her something much heavier: you are the CEO of the league's future. That changes everything. It changes how you walk onto the court. It changes how you handle criticism. It changes how you respond to pressure. Because you're no longer just reacting to the environment, you're shaping it. And from that point forward, you could see the difference. Clark stopped trying to win over people who had already decided how they felt about her. She stopped managing her success in a way that made it easier for others to accept. She stopped apologizing for the sold-out arenas, for the record-breaking viewership, for the attention that followed her everywhere. Instead, she embraced it. She recognized that the same gravity she creates on the court, the way defenses collapse around her, the way space opens for teammates, is the exact same force she creates off the court within the league itself. Everything shifts because of her presence. And once she stopped resisting that reality, she started using it. That shift became undeniable during the 2025 postseason. Because the player that stepped onto the court wasn't the same one from early in her career. The difference wasn't just statistical, it was psychological. It was visible in the smallest details. The pace of her movement. The calm in her decisions. The absence of urgency where there used to be pressure. She no longer felt the need to prove anything on the first possession. No forced shots. No rushed decisions. Just control.
Another thing, if Caitlin Clark gets going, she's one of the few players that has...
She played with patience, the kind that comes from understanding that games aren't won in moments, they're won over time. That the fourth quarter matters more than the first. That consistency beats spectacle when the stakes are highest. And her edge didn't disappear, it evolved. Teammates and analysts started noticing something different about her presence, something subtle but powerful. What many began calling the bird stare. Not loud, not emotional, just quiet confidence. The kind that doesn't need validation because it already knows the outcome. She could pull up from deep, hold that look, and you could feel it. She already knew. The defender knew. The crowd knew. And the silence in that moment carried more weight than any celebration ever could. One of the clearest changes came in how she dealt with officiating. The version of Clark who used to react, who used to engage, who let those moments affect her rhythm, that version was gone. In its place was a player who absorbed contact without distraction, who moved on instantly, who answered everything the only way that mattered, with execution. No arguments. No wasted energy. Just results. By the time the Indiana Fever made their deep playoff run, the transformation was complete. Clark wasn't just playing basketball anymore. She was controlling it. Every possession felt intentional. Every movement calculated. She wasn't reacting to defenses, she was dictating them. Finding teammates before they even realized they were open. creating advantages before the defense could adjust, playing the game multiple steps ahead. And that's what made it so dangerous. Because the physical play didn't stop. The targeting didn't stop. The pressure didn't stop. But her response changed. She didn't fight it. She absorbed it. And then she answered it with performance so precise, so controlled, that it left opponents with nothing to work with. No reaction to feed off. No weakness to exploit. By the end of that postseason, something had shifted across the league. The players who had tried to disrupt her rhythm were the ones losing theirs. The teams that had built strategies around stopping her were being forced to adjust in ways they hadn't anticipated. And through all of it, her expression stayed the same. Calm. Focused. Silent. Because she understood something now that she didn't before, that control isn't just about the ball in your hands. It's about everything around you. And once a player reaches that level, the conversation changes. Because this was never just about talent. It was about timing. The kind of timing that doesn't just produce great players, it reshapes systems, redefines expectations, changes what a league believes is possible. And now the question isn't who Caitlin Clark is becoming. The question is what happens next. Because if one conversation with Larry Bird could create this level of transformation, what happens when she fully steps into everything she now understands? When she's not just controlling the game, but the silence around it too. At that point, it's no longer about who can stop her. It's about who's even playing the same game anymore.